B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's the last day of July, Wednesday, 7/31/19. There was a presidential debate with 10 Democrats in Detroit last night. I have lengthy commentary, and we'll serve it up in the second half of today's podcast, because I begin with a very important story to me. This is a case that I've been covering for more than 12 years. We call it the Lodi Mosque frame-up. Bob Mueller was the director of the FBI. At the time, Hamid Hayat and his father were accused of material support to terrorists. The younger Hayat, Hamid, on his 25th birthday, was sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. The FBI, using a paid informant who encouraged him to attend a terrorist training camp when he went to Pakistan to try to find a wife. Well, despite the evidence at the trial, there was a coerced confession that the jury believed, and he had a pretty weak attorney. I interviewed her at the time. But on further reflection, the original trial judge, whose name is District Judge Garland Burrell, he teamed up with U.S. Magistrate Deborah Barnes. Back in January, they recommend overturning Hayat's convictions. But McGregor Scott, the U.S. attorney from Sacramento who carried the case, who fought the appeals, and who remains in that job today, he kept fighting what we now know to be a false conviction. And I applaud the Hayat family and attorney Dennis Reardon and others who have fought tirelessly over the last 12 years to find justice in this case. And I think it's important to point out, for people who now regard Bob Mueller as a national hero because of the limited hangout investigation he did of the Russiagate narrative, this is his true legacy. This is why I call him St. Bob, because he has a dark and dirty history of using paid informants, 15,000 of them on the street at any given time, to set up and knock over these now over 800 cases of alleged domestic terrorism. And Trevor Aronson is the reporter, he now is at The Intercept, who has done more work on this set of issues than anybody else. The last time I talked to Trevor, as I often do, I said, hey, we have over 800 so-called domestic terrorism convictions now. How many of those are untainted? And he said, maybe a dozen. All the rest have a paid informant, often inducing an underperforming individual, sometimes mentally ill, developmentally disabled people. And the litany of these wrongful prosecutions has drawn very little criticism from people who should care. And I often find myself like a voice in the wilderness addressing these critical issues. And Trevor Aronson has a good piece at The Intercept today. He dug into the background claims of John Ratcliffe, Trump's choice to replace Dan Coats as Director of National Intelligence. Now, he's a 3-term member of Congress from the Dallas suburbs. He was mayor of a small town, and he claims that he was a terrorism prosecutor. And the law that created the DNI post requires that the individual have extensive national security expertise. But in the only case that he can claim any connection to, he played a very limited role, and a tangential one at that. It was the Holy Land case, and this was a group that was not found guilty in a first trial. Then in a second trial, they found them guilty of sending money to Hamas. And I think that's a tainted prosecution in and of itself. But Ratcliffe basically was called in after the trial, the first one, to investigate alleged inappropriate contact between a member of the jury and a Justice Department employee. That was the extent of his involvement. Yet in his resume, he not only claims that he locked up terrorists, but that he arrested 300 illegal aliens in a single day. Now, according to the New York Times, Ratcliffe did play a role in the case, bringing charges against 280 non-citizens working for a chicken processor. But he did not arrest anyone. That was done by ICE. And the only thing that comes close to his claim is that he prosecuted a psychologically troubled Iraq War veteran who pleaded guilty to possessing a pipe bomb. Trump doesn't do a very good job of vetting the people he appoints. Basically, he watches them on Fox News, he likes the cut of their jib and the bullshit that's spewed, and he says, I want that guy. Now, this is a critical case. And it is a victory for Donald Trump. A federal judge in New York has dismissed a lawsuit brought by the Democratic National Committee against the Trump campaign, the Russian government, WikiLeaks, and various Trump campaign officials, which alleged involvement in hacking the Democratic Party email accounts during the 2016 presidential race. U.S. District Judge John Coeltel, I guess that's how his name is pronounced, he was appointed by Bill Clinton. He rejected the central theory of the racketeering suit, that the Trump campaign and campaign aides and allies abetted the theft of emails by encouraging WikiLeaks to publish the messages and by urging they be released when they would be of maximum political benefit to candidate Donald Trump. But the judge said these actions were protected by the First Amendment. Even if the documents had been provided directly to the campaign and the campaign defendants, they could have published the documents themselves without liability because they did not participate in the theft, and the documents are of public concern. The judge said the lawsuit didn't allege that anyone beyond the Russian Federation took part in the hacking of the Democratic Party computer systems or email accounts. Now, the Batowski lawsuit related to Seth Rich might change that ultimately. But that, of course, is the finding of the Mueller report. The judge said that WikiLeaks couldn't be legitimately sued as a recipient of that information because what was released was of genuine public interest and was genuine. The judge said the DNC's published internal communications allowed the American electorate to look behind the curtain at one of the two major political parties during a presidential election. This type of information is plainly of the type entitled to the strongest protection that the First Amendment offers. And he continued, the DNC's interest in keeping donor lists and fundraising strategies secret is dwarfed by the newsworthiness of the documents as a whole. If WikiLeaks could be held liable for publishing documents concerning the DNC's political, financial, and voter engagement strategies simply because the DNC labels them secret, then so could any newspaper or other media outlet. So this is an important determination. It also ends a scurrilous attempt to demonize WikiLeaks, which is not an American entity, which does, in my view, enjoy expansive First Amendment rights, even though it's not a U.S. entity. And, of course, the judge is noting that the documents were real and they were germane to public knowledge. And that's what the DNC and all the Russiagate promoters wanted to divert your attention from. Oh, don't look at the way the Clinton people squeezed Bernie out, shortchanged him of money in the joint fundraising operations, tilted primaries against him. No, don't look at that. Russia, 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 Russia. And get this, over at Forbes, that's a business magazine, maybe you've never picked it up, but business writer Kenneth Raposa, in a kind of casual and somewhat inaccurate way, says other than just hating Russia because it's well run by super Bond villain Vlad Putin, there is no reason to sanction Russia anymore. Now that the special counsel investigation is over, and the only thing Mueller could find involving Russians that was worth punishing were these 13 troll farms, actually there was only one, that had no impact on the election outcome, that's accurate, and whose participants will never see a U.S. court or prison, that's correct. Well, he says Russia, for Wall Street anyway, has been exonerated. The Mueller testimony was a total faceplant for the Democrats, anyone looking to link Trump to a villainous Russia. The story is officially over as a market mover. And he notes that Russia is the hottest performing emerging market this year, and a lot of investors are itchy to get a piece of the action. But they're concerned about the sanctions. And this writer, retraces the steps of the claims, first of all, that because of Ukraine and Crimea, that Obama imposed sanctions, then expanded them after the alleged Russian meddling. Then they were expanded after the Syria engagement by Russia. But the Forbes article concludes, now that the election meddling story is over and the special counsel is complete, the only things that remain a real threat to Russia are Ukraine and Syria. And I mentioned Russia. Bob Mueller started a whole new round of hysteria, saying that the 2020 elections are going to be messed with, somehow interfered with by Russia, and he said, vaguely, other actors. But this is what really bugs me, is we have actual Americans who've been indicted for issues related to insider election fraud. But we're telling people to worry about Russian hacking, and they combed 50 states' election systems. What kind of comb did they use? Anyway, in North Carolina, related to the congressional race last fall in District 9, Leslie Dowless has been charged with 2 counts of felony obstruction of justice, perjury, solicitation to commit perjury, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and possession of absentee ballots. Now, this is the case that's being prosecuted. In Georgia, the governor's race was tainted by the fact that the Secretary of State, who got elected governor, purged voters, blocked registrations, used every trick in the book to prevent Democrats from electing Stacey Abrams. And yet Russia. Here in California, Governor Newsom has signed a bill that was carried by my state senator, Mike McGuire, which requires anybody, including presidential and gubernatorial candidates, who want to be on the primary ballots in California, must release 5 years of tax returns to become eligible for primary elections here in the Golden State. And what's interesting is Gavin Newsom, the new governor, signed it. Even though he did not publicly disclose his tax returns, he let a group of reporters review them. But this new law would require him in the future to share his tax returns. So this is not limited to Trump. Of course, he takes everything personally, and he'll see it that way, and I'm sure that was Mike McGuire's intention. My sinking feeling is that it will not be upheld by the courts. Meanwhile, the ousted governor of Puerto Rico, who is due to leave office 5 p.m. Friday, Ricardo Rosselló, is trying to grease the way to pick his own successor. As you know, under the Constitution of Puerto Rico, the Secretary of State who normally would have succeeded Rosselló had already resigned. The post is vacant. So Rosselló is nominating Pedro Pierluisi, who has served as the non-voting delegate in Congress, to become the instant Secretary of State and then move up to the governorship Friday at 5:01. But the people of Venezuela are tired of all the insider games and the cronyism. And this guy, Pierluisi, is part of the power establishment. He, he does have a history here. he lost the party's 2016 primary to Rosselló, and he is a guy who has been, an establishment figure for some time. And it appears the people of Puerto Rico really want to clean house. And Pierre Luisi has said, I've listened to the people's messages, their demonstrations, their demands. In this new challenge in my life, I will only answer to the people. But his brother-in-law is the chair of the oversight board that protects the venture capitalists, the vulture capitalists, from, discounting of the debt that they hold. And Pierre Luisi's wife, Maria Elena Carrion, they're in the process of divorcing, but let's see, he introduced legislation that would benefit at least 2 Wall Street companies that had hired his wife. So he is hardly pure as the driven snow, but that's how the game rolls in Puerto Rico these days. Well, the Federal Reserve made an unusual move and reduced the benchmark interest rate by 1/4 point, the first time since the meltdown of 2008. As you know, we had almost zero interest rate for quite a while, and the Fed has been inching it up to fight inflation and to promote savings. Because right now, you put money in a savings account, you don't get anything for it. And America has one of the lowest savings rates worldwide. Now, the risk of this is that the Fed has very little wiggle room and very little leverage left in the event of a recession. And we're overdue for a recession. Trump and his trade war are risking a worldwide recession. If Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, we have an instant worldwide recession and spike in oil prices. So this is risky. And this is on the heels of the rather brief trade talks that started and finished today in Shanghai. We sent Steve Mnuchin and Bob Lighthizer, and they had talks and ended with no agreement. And so this trade war is going to slog on for a while. China is already limping into a recession, and the damage could grow quite a bit on these shores once people realize that we're paying the tariffs, not Chinese exporters. There's a novel lawsuit brought by the state of Arizona before the United States Supreme Court requesting a rare legal maneuver that the court hear a case against the Sackler family, the profiteers from OxyContin and other opioids. So Arizona is asking the Supremes to take original jurisdiction. And they occasionally do this in a case where a dispute involves a state as the party. So the state of Arizona is saying that the Sackler family illegally diverted $4 billion in profits from Purdue Pharma to the family members. They looted the company, and now the company doesn't have any money to pay settlements for the hundreds of thousands of deaths and the large numbers of people who remain addicted to opiates in this country. The case argues that the cost to the U.S. economy was more than $78 billion in the last 2 decades, and that Purdue earned more than $30 billion from sales of OxyContin alone. And this is a case that I can't settle for you or for me. John Hyten has been nominated to the Joint Chiefs of Staff Vice Chairman, and then surfaced a very credible accuser, Army Colonel Catherine Splettozer. And Splettozer says that Hyten came to her hotel room, subjected her to unwanted sexual advances, kissing, hugging, rubbing up against her, and he even ejaculated in some encounter where she was trying to push him away. Now, these are pretty specific claims, and I have a hard time rejecting Splettozer's accusations. But Air Force officials say they have 10,000 pages of investigative documents, interviews with 50 people. But the bottom line is it's a he said, she said. And they seem willing to believe him. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like John Morgan, Judy Holloway, and Carla Mahoney and Ben Brotman. They each kick in $5 a month. I invite you to do the same. That's what keeps me going here. It's what pays the bills, keeps the internet connected. All you have to do is visit peterbcollins.com, click on the menu button, then click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and you can choose $5, $10, $20 a month. With a $50 annual subscription and a mailing address in the continental U.S., you're entitled to a bonus book like 2001. I'd love to send you this copy of Dystopian Utopia. It's an architect's look at the future and how to respond to climate change. I think it's a very important book. It's a $55 value, so hey, get an annual subscription and you're $5 ahead. So, as I mentioned, last night in Detroit, there was a debate of 10 Democratic candidates for president. And let me begin by noting that your humble host blew it yesterday. I falsely reported to you that Kamala Harris, the senator from California, was going to participate in the debate last night. In fact, she's on the stage tonight. And so some of my comments didn't square because I expected her modified Medicare for All plan to be the focus of attention, particularly with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on the stage. But without Harris, CNN stepped in and provided the foil in the form of Jake Tapper. And the whole evening was framed around Republican talking points and gotcha games. Jake Tapper was determined to get Sanders and Warren to admit that their Medicare for All plan would raise taxes on the middle class. And they artfully dodged the question. But the honest answer is, yes, people will pay a little more in taxes, but millions of Americans will pay no premiums for health insurance, no partial in premiums because employers don't pay the whole freight in many cases anymore. And this claim that Medicare for All, the transition to it, would force people to give up their private health care plans as if we're going to cut them off from insurance altogether, it's totally bogus. And CNN repeatedly turned to one of the lowest polling candidates, the guy before last night most of us had never heard of, a 1- or 2-term congressman from Maryland named John Delaney. He told his story. He's a successful entrepreneur. He claims to have worked in the healthcare industry, and that pissed off Bernie. And Bernie was upset at the way they were sandbagged. And unfortunately, he came off as angry for most of the evening. And his demeanor, isn't that warm and fuzzy to begin with. He's a just the facts kind of guy. But he was red-faced and yelling. And so I give the advantage last night to Elizabeth Warren. She was direct, she was on point, she was aggressive, she didn't give any ground. But she also appeared passionate and not angry. I also think that Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, acquitted himself well. And let's see where I have it here. I give him credit for one of the best lines of the night. They're going to call us socialists if we embrace a left agenda. They're going to call us socialists if we embrace a conservative agenda. So we might as well stand for what we believe in. So the saboteurs who were most effective last night were Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana, and John Hickenlooper, former Colorado governor. These are corporate Democrats who are willing to attack other Democrats with Republican talking points and claims that Sanders and Warren moved the party too left and that that's a recipe for disaster. Delaney picked up on that. And also, Amy Klobuchar used some of the same lines of attack, not quite as aggressively. And so I slam CNN for the way they constructed this debate. And Margaret Sullivan writing at the Washington Post, captured it pretty well. One of her friends, complaining about the debate, described it as a reality TV show with journalists playing celebrity hosts. Sullivan continues, with frustratingly tiny and rigidly enforced response time, outsized attention to fringe candidates, and divisive questions, some of which could have been framed by the Republican National Committee, the first Detroit debate was a lost opportunity to inform the voting public. And she credits Joshua Benton, describing the debate as an obsession with conflict over explanation, forcing complex policies into sound bites, above it all savviness that only makes sense if you spend all your time on politics, Twitter, or in D.C. And Sullivan notes that it started with a painfully high-octane video that managed to simultaneously evoke the NFL Today, World Wrestling Entertainment, and Jeopardy! Then there was the spaceship-like set that took 100 people 8 days to build and involved 9 53-foot semi-trucks. Isn't that impressive? Now, one of the other things I want to note is that I started listening to the debate while I was driving home, and I have satellite radio in my car. And what's interesting is how heavy my subwoofer was straining to keep up with the low-frequency rumble being put out by the CNN broadcast. Now, when you get home and watch it on a big screen TV, with surround sound, it kind of blends in better. But I just want to alert you, and if you have a subwoofer and you know what I'm talking about, listen to CNN critically, because they hit that bottom end a lot, and it sends a signal, an audio signal across that is subaudible to humans, but you feel it. And they use it to manipulate our emotions. It's pretty effective and just a little bit insidious. So I credit Bob Mackey over at The Intercept with this line: Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders dominate Democratic debate, set up to ambush them. And he quotes Youssef Munayr of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. CNN set up this debate as a multi-front ambush on Warren and Sanders. And the claim that is popular with mainstream pundits that Democrats are in danger of moving too far to the left. And this is accurate. That framing led to the bizarre opening exchange in which a fringe candidate, former Representative John Delaney of Maryland, was invited by moderator Tapper to attack the two highest polling candidates. And then they got knocked for punching down, criticizing a no-name candidate. In a forceful rebuttal to Delaney, Warren pointed out that by accusing Sanders of wanting to take people's private health insurance away, he was channeling the Republicans. Let me be clear about this, Warren said. We are the Democrats. We're not about trying to take away health care from anyone. That's what the Republicans are trying to do, and we should stop using Republican talking points. And that raises this issue for me. I heard very few references to the way the Republicans have promised to repeal and replace Obamacare. And they have hobbled it, they've wounded it, but they haven't killed it, and they haven't taken any steps to replace it. Remember all those claims Trump made about how great the health care was going to be after the Republicans got finished with it? So it was a really bizarre setup. And CNN had an agenda. And they made it very clear that they see their role as keeping the Democratic Party from moving too far to the left. And I give Warren a lot of credit. She opened with a very strong statement that she believes in big and bold ideas. And that's where I believe a winning Democratic nominee is going to land. And I think Bernie Sanders still has a shot. And Elizabeth Warren is strong on domestic issues. She's not very strong on foreign policy. And there's that Pocahontas thing that Trump can summon at any moment, which is a fairly devastating attack, even though I consider it really unfair. Over at the New York Times, they put a bunch of their reporters to task, commentators more than reporters. Nick Kristof. Sanders came across as passionate, caring, and forceful, but also as perpetually angry in a way that I found off-putting. Well, I think that was accurate. And I don't know why they asked Sarah Vowell. I like Sarah. She's a great commentator, but I don't consider her to be a political expert. Anyway, they turned to her and said, when Warren and Sanders dismissed legitimate critiques of their similar health plans, particularly the radical proposal of abolishing private health insurance, Sarah Vowell was enraged. Well, sorry, Sarah. That is not true. Interesting analysis from Alexander Burns of the New York Times. If a moderate candidate's going to rise from the pack of 2020 Democratic hopefuls, no one in the forum appeared to gain enough political propulsion to catch up with Sanders and Warren. The two populist liberals have defined the Democratic Party's policy debate up to this point, a dynamic that only intensified on Tuesday. And later in his piece, he writes, complicating matters for moderate Democrats is the sense among liberals that their party has tried a comparatively cautious approach too many times. Hillary Clinton, 2016. John Kerry, 2004. Al Gore, 2000. That is my case. He goes on to speculate no candidate besides Biden, who is running explicitly as a centrist, is qualified yet for the next round of debates in September, although Senator Klobuchar is said to be close to that threshold. So it is fair to say that some of the people that we saw last night that we'll see tonight will not make the cut for the September debates. And then there is Marianne Williamson. As I've said, I am conflicted about her. I think that, like anyone else, she has a right to run for president. She met the metrics to be on the stage. She does offer a non-political worldview that has some moments of appeal. But she's also very stern, comes off as a scold. And, who am I reading here? This is BuzzFeed's Catherine Miller. She doesn't talk like a politician, but she doesn't exactly talk like your average person either. And there's something magnetic in hearing racism described as a dark psychic force, as Williamson did on Tuesday. Where she sounds hazy and a little silly is around some of the domestic policy proposals she puts forth, like a Department of Children. She can be pretty testy, too, in interviews. But separate from Williamson, her argument that America's problem is spiritual in nature and moral is a compelling one. And it's part of the reason her case for reparations works on stage. And so I remain mixed about Marianne Williamson. I can tell you I'm not likely to vote for her. But I don't dismiss her appeal. And if she would deliver her message a little more effectively, I might find it more compelling. And here is Arlette, one of my Facebook friends. She writes, for someone claiming to have a message of love, she comes across as a person with intense anger, visibly bubbling just under the surface. And once again, she deliberately insulted the other candidates. I do not know if she's passive-aggressive, but watching her gave me the kind of wretched feeling I've had on the thankfully rare occasions when I've been savagely attacked by a passive-aggressive. I also found it unsettling and creepy when she gave her version of I alone can fix it. And I agree. I cringed when she said that one of her comments, I think, if you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. And she later said that of all the people on the stage, she's the only one who could run this emotional and psychological campaign. Well, I don't think that's going to get very far. But the New York Times panel of their columnists, Jamel Bouie, gave her a 7 out of 10. Quote, it feels insane to say this, but Williamson outdebated virtually everyone else on the stage. She gave a compelling answer on reparations, returned again and again to the most important issue for Democratic voters, beating Trump. Liz Mayer, I have no earthly idea what she was talking about half the time, but she got in a good line and had a breakout moment. She'll probably raise a lot online this week, maybe get to 5%. She speaks in zero policy detail, and a lot of voters like that. It's hard to attack. No one knows what to do with her, which plays to her advantage. Also, people vote personality, not policy, and she's a celebrity. And Brett Stevens, a conservative, he gave her 2 out of 10. She is to this debate what Jimmy, the rent is too damn high McMillan, was to a past New York City mayoral debate. Except McMillan was right. So, I think that it's an interesting exercise. We learned a few things about the candidates, but the format of the debate is so frustrating that nobody really gets to say much. And it is just a gotcha and gotcha back kind of exchange. And Trump, after getting news of this court case dismissing the DNC lawsuit, he tweeted about that, but he's back at tweeting against African Americans. He singled out Don Lemon, the news anchor from CNN, who was one of the 3 panelists last night, called him the dumbest man on television. He's too dumb to understand that he's supposed to ask fair questions. Well, once again, I'm not Don Lemon's biggest fan, but this gratuitous racist attack is totally out of bounds. And Ford Green posted on Facebook a new term that I'd like you to learn: stochastic terrorist. Stochastic is S-T-O-C-H-A-S-T-I-C. Stochastic terrorism is the use of mass communications to incite lone wolves to carry out unpredictable, violent attacks. The stochastic terrorist is certain that his inflammatory rhetoric will stir up violence. He just does not know exactly what will happen, or who will do it, or where, or when, or perhaps how. We got ourselves a stochastic terrorist sitting in the White House, friends. Thanks for listening to this news and comment. You're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.